It's not that easy being green. Having to spend each day the color of... Hey, what am I talking about here? Unless you're on a roller coaster, there's nothing wrong with being green. At least not in the case of today's NeverDex entry. To date, we've touched upon the Jones Sisters Mythos Pillars characters, Viscountess Winona Wasp, and Juniper Squirrel Caribou Ander Combinoft. And today, the especially musical and effervescent Neverbeing whom we will profile has had a great impact on all their lives, is the enchanting and alluring mother figure to so many of Toxanon and Slivscorn Fae of the Neverscape. Introducing Cello Hopper DeScorch and her Combinoft Laddie. Born nearly 34 Never years prior,
Let's say, for example, if we equated Nevertime to Earth time, Cello and Laddie could have been around in the 1940s, the 1960s, or even the 1980s.
that's why they're called Never years. Celesta Melody Hopper was the second-born child of renowned explorer Edmund Gilbert Hopper and his beloved Combinoft Soprana the Never Spider, aka Churro Hopper. Like with Churro's elder sister Dextra the Never Spider, their taste in men, that was not a pun, Churro and Dextra are vegan and would never hurt those that they love, in that they were both in love with two of the resident grasshopper men of Hopper Hills, Edmund the Explorer and a movie-making friend named Wilhelm Scream. Because of their interspecies genetics, their offspring were hybrids of grasshoppers and black widow spiders, albeit with benign toxins and answering to their dominant genes as their species. In Celia's case, she was a spider with hopper genes and legs, and in the case of Cello and her elder brother Stratocaster, they too were mixed with the dominant forms of grasshoppers with limited silk-generating properties. When Cello was first born, Strat, like many other older brothers, believed that having a little sister or brother would, now I wouldn't say ruin, as he was not that pessimistic that he needed to be pacified with the promise of a toy crane. Our director is telling me that we nearly crossed a fatal line, so moving on. Strat was already 12 Never cycles old, so he was significantly older when his parents got back together after some time apart and had Cello. He was old enough that he would be potentially impacted by the change in dynamics in the house, but when he held the slumbering Celeste in his arms, the dreaming infant gave her big brother a kiss on the cheek, a Kodak moment that was happily captured by Edmund. Churro too had seen the whole thing, and she could sense empathically what was going on in Cello's dreams. She was indeed dreaming about their family, and the kiss was indeed meant for her big brother. She developed for him what is known to young magical beings as a loyalty crush, fraternal feelings that are deeply elevated but do not cross the line of romance. Bromance when it comes to sporting events, but nothing else. Cello had gotten her nickname, coincidentally a portmanteau of her first and middle names, but for the unintentional musical notes that her legs generated when they rubbed together in her pram and cradle. Edmund's family tree did have a whole side that was descended from Neverscapian crickets, but it's never fun to dissect the magic. While Strat was a musician as well, he had not inherited the cricket gene as dominantly as Cello. Nevertheless, he helped nurture Cello's music for a time, but by the time she was 4, she was already more advanced in music than he was. Strat kept at it, and the two siblings would perform together with their mother, who was an opera and lounge singer beloved by their Neverzone and the great myriad at large. But Strat never shined as brightly as his sister, which made him bitter for a long time. When Cello was 15, Strat had given up playing music and began drinking away his sorrows at sausage taverns all over the island. Don't worry, there's no alcohol in the Petaliaverse Neverzone. The flavor just has a kick. Cello had made friends with two Neverbeings who were also protégés of her mentors Firefox and Snow Tiger, named Dainty the Mousette and Juniper Squirrel. Dainty had been a dear friend of the family for years, but the day that Juniper joined the mix was when one day after class, Juniper happened to pass by the music hall and they had heard the most articulate, complex, and romantic violin music ever. The two girls went in and were surprised that those melodies were being made by Cello's front and middle legs. Juniper was stunned by this, and Dainty introduced her two friends to each other. Juniper was invited to the Hopper residence as a guest of honor that night, just like when Cello first befriended Dainty. By this time, baby Arpeggio was added to the mix, and the two brothers and their father welcomed the lovely flying squirrel into their home. What happened following this can be found in my Juniper Squirrel video in the link below. A few months after this, Edmund passed away, and their mother had tour commitments to keep throughout the Great Myriad. Cello had come to rely on her mentors and her two best friends to be the family that she needed, and they were happy to do so. Celia helped tend to little Arthur and house-sitting for them in Churro's absence, and this extra support would be needed with what was to come. It had not been long since Edmund's death, and Cello was still under the mentorship of the two never-tried Kombanoffs. One dark night, however, the princesses were abducted from their home and found dead the next day. Juniper and her new Kombanoff Will Scott had been part of a search and rescue party, but the kidnappers' trail was impossible to track, and ZSF retiree Bruno Bohr was added to the body count. Something inside Cello had snapped when she learned about all this. Bruno was a friend of her father's, and her two mentors were like mothers to her. Cello did not bother to put up a fight against her dark sorrow. She lost her sparkle. Her music was now depressing and grungy, and her attire and appearance was dark and gothic. Poor Arthur did not know who this girl was, or what happened to his big sister. Ellen was now under the stranglehold of a terrible blizzard that lasted for weeks. Some believe that it was a natural reaction to the death of Firefox and Snow Tiger. Others believe that it was due to the dark magic that their kidnappers who murdered them had used. Whatever it was, Cello went out into the cold, believing that she never had anything left to lose, and took risks. What she found that one night, however, would change the whole course of her entire life. Hopping through the blizzard to the edge of the forest, Cello was secretly hoping to see the auroras in the sky, but the dark clouds obstructed every last bit of the sky. The winds that coursed through the air blocked out all other sounds, but somehow Cello could hear a tiny shivering near her. It was a sign, and the real heart that she possessed, that was restrained by her broken soul for so long, had finally managed to awaken enough so that Cello's instincts could take over, and she maternally hopped over to the source of the sound. The sound was of an unborn seed reflexively shivering through the cold, and Cello immediately recognized it. This was Firefox's baby seed, Petalia, the one that she and her other students adored so much. The shivering infant flower seed with pink eyes and tick marks on her face was held to Cello's chest as she endeavored to activate the flares from her knapsack and open up the chocolate bar that she had so that Petalia could absorb its sugars. The winds grew colder and unforgiving, but Cello was steadfast. She refused to leave. Not that she would have gotten far on her own in this terrible storm. A couple of hours had passed, and Strat's friend Laddiebug to Scorch, aided by Juniper Squirrel and the Fey Force Flyers, had found Cello. Juniper brought Laddie down to her and asked if she had seen Magnolia. Cello had forgotten that wherever Petalia was, Magnolia was there to protect her. Just as Cello began to fear the worst, Juniper received a psychon from Lady Galatea up at the Nevertribe village that Magnolia was found safe and sound, but was suffering a terrible emotional breakdown. Juniper and the other Flyers were called away to take care of another emergency. Laddie assured her that they would be fine. A bold statement to make, as he realized that just after Juniper and her squad had left, that Petalia would need to be ensconced in the soil in order to make it through the night, much less through the rest of the storm. Cello was scared to death for Petalia, crying on Laddie's shoulder, allowing the repressed feelings of the last 6 months to finally flow out. The sound of her cries had arrested the attention of a platoon of ant soldiers of Princess Sixlet's ant colony. This gave Laddie an idea, and he pleaded with the troopers to help them plant Petalia into the ground. The leader refused, as there had been bad blood between the ants and the hoppers for hundreds of years, and he didn't trust them.
Today's NeverDex video is brought to you by Misery and Pick Scars, The Ant and the Grasshopper 3, Unwanted House Guest, starring the voices of Gilbert Gottmilk as Grippy Grasshopper and Ron No Kidding Jr. as the voice of Antsy Antoinette. Ever seen Uncle Buck and What About Bob? Well, not according to the writers, you haven't. Misery and Pick Scars, A&G 3, rated B, starts Friday in abandoned drive-ins everywhere. And stream it now on Hulu and Cinelax 2 minutes before it's released. Yes, we have come to that point, people. Welcome to the future.
We now return to the NeverDex.
Cello and Laddie were desperate for the Ant Brigade's help in planting Petalia safely into the ground, but the general refused to budge. Luckily, the princess, disguised as a grunt, took over the reins of the brigade under orders of the queen. Sixlet helped dig a hole while the troopers were conflicted in who to listen to. Cello then pleaded with the rest of the brigade. Whatever they asked of her, she would do without question, swearing her eternal gratitude and loyalty to the Ant Kingdom. The general had left, but then came back with a special potion while the other ants continued where the disguised princess left off. This potion was a binary compound that was activated by cold temperatures. It was created by Silver Dart of the Never tribe. Cello helped apply the gel to the interior of the hole with her hind legs while holding her precious bundle in her arms. Finally, the hole was big enough to house the little Never seedling securely. Cello gave Petalia a kiss and then gently planted her into the soil as Laddie and the ants helped cover it up and got a fire going with a protection spell. When all was said and done, Princess Sixlet, after the rest of the brigade left, took off her disguise and granted Cello and Laddie meritorious honors. Thanks to them, the blood feud was finally over for good, a feat that the royals had secretly worked toward with the elders of the Hopper clans for many never decades. Cello took off her pink wig and placed it lovingly around Petalia's hair sprout. Laddie and Cello laid there in the snow, just as the storm had miraculously died down, almost like an omen. Laddie told her that Strat was scared stiff when he learned that Cello was missing, and that was why he had sent him to find Juniper and get help. Cello slyly asked if that was the only reason. She could feel something in his voice, something her empathic powers keened on now that they were fully reactivated in earnest. Laddie saw the blush on Cello's cheeks, and he suddenly realized that it was not from the warmth of the fire or the blankets. Laddie was almost as old as Edmund was, but Cello was now an adult. She had seen the courage and spirit that he had displayed in tracking her down and steadfastly helping her plant Petalia into the ground and negotiating with the ants, when any other guy would have ignored his friend's worries and hunkered down in a safe place for his own sake. Laddie still did not respond. He had always seen Cello as Strat's kid sister, and that it would change so much if he allowed himself to embrace those feelings that Cello was ready to reciprocate. Like she did with Strat so many years ago, Cello kissed the Irish-brogued rogue's cheek, and then nuzzled him under her covers. It was pointless for Laddie to deny these feelings for her. She was of legal age, of sound mind, and they helped create a new life together. By the end of the night, Cello and Laddie were in love, and Petalia made 3. 2 never years had passed, and Churro had finally returned, and the Combinoft ring on her front leg told the whole family that she had found a new love during her travels. Had this been the only component to her news, things would have been fine, but when her Combinoft arrived at the house, he was most unwelcome by her 2 oldest kids. Churro's new husband was all too familiar to Cello and Strat. He was their Uncle Jargon, their father's little brother. The kids had only known the side of him that was a cheater, a schemer, and a lazy loafer. But he had a kind heart and loved his brothers and their children dearly, and he had changed. This news was too tough to chew through right away, but Cello offered an olive branch to her mother and stepfather by having a double date with them and bringing her Combinoft with her. Churro was thrilled to bits by this, but later that night when they met up, she discovered that her new son V combined was Laddie, who was a few years older than even Churro herself. This led to discourse and arguments between mother and daughter. Needless to say, the double date was called off. Churro had disapproved of Laddie combining with Cello, and the latter was called out by her mother's hypocrisy, having married a man who was not only her former brother V combined, who was a decade younger than her, and she didn't even bother to tell her own children. Cello dragged Laddie away from there, and they left in a huff. Churro had never had a fight with any of her children before, and she felt terrible about it. Strat kept his opinions to himself, and Arthur was still a toddler, so his uncle was still a familiar presence without any kind of conflict to him. Leaving Jargon to sit for his little nephew/new stepson, Churro paid a long overdue visit to her beloved niece Celia. Celia took stock of what Churro's situation consisted of, said she knew where her cousins were coming from, but she also believed that her aunt was truly in love with Jargon and that he was there for her when Edmund had died. and it was a terrible loss for him as well. Churro asked what she could do to fix things with her daughter. Celia showed her a needlepoint of a young flowerling and said to her, "Visit her, and you will find what you are looking for, Aunt Churro." The sun had already set, and Magnolia was perched outside of her treehouse maintaining a vigil. Churro pleaded with the young snow owl to allow her an audience with the slumbering Petalia. Projecting an emoji of a thumbs up and a smile, Magnolia quietly wafted down to the ground and lightly awakened the young flower. In a case of mistaken identity, or impulse, Petalia had referred to Churro as Nana, which seemed to hit Churro in her soft spot, feeling bad about having to correct her. Churro could see, as plain as the freckles on Petalia's face, that she was so well loved and well taken care of and so bright because of Cello and Laddie. Every animal never being on the island loved Petalia very much, but Cello and Laddie were there for her more than almost anyone. Suddenly, age had erased itself from the equation. To Churro, it didn't matter anymore. Petalia did, and so did her children. What her daughter had with Laddie was genuine, and this beautiful Bulby was proof of that. Cello had come out of the Neverwoods, having heard the whole thing. Petalia hugged her, and then Cello hugged her mother, who then hugged her son V combined, thanking him for everything, and vowing to move forward a changed spider. When Ross the Rattler contemplated having his venom glands removed and his remaining toxins drained, he sought the guidance of Petalia before going through with the procedure. Cello was suspicious of Ross's intentions, just like Magnolia was, but Petalia knew how to speak to Ross's concerns, the same way that she had done for Cello's cousin Celia. To Ross, he would rather have lost his own life undergoing the procedure rather than taking a life like he nearly did accidentally with the Falcon girl that he was in love with, Philidia. Petalia encouraged him to follow his heart, and that she would be supportive of his choice no matter what. His mind was made up, and the procedure was scheduled, with Ladies Galatea and Sal supervising. Petalia made a small request of Cello, an odd one to be sure, but she pleaded with her gal pal to serenade Ross while he underwent the procedure. Cello was not sure what good it would do, but those blue orbs of Petalia's seldom heard the word no. He underwent the procedure with Cello by his side, strumming away at her legs, creating the most enchanting melodies. There had been times when Galatea was performing surgery and the local anesthetic would wear off near the end or in the middle of the procedure. But Cello's music had an effect on it, reinforced it, and it kept Ross under the whole time, and he came out of it the way he knew he was meant to be, not to mention as fresh as a daisy. Sadly, his troubles were not over. Ross was now an outcast in his home community and to the rest of the island. Even with the nurturing love of his combined-off-to-be, Dainty Mousette, it was not enough to make him feel wanted anywhere or understood. Petalia and Cello were immediately reminded of Celia, who left Hopper Hills ages ago to live in an artistic co-op called NS Estates, 7 miles north of the coast, who also suffered from these same feelings of inferiority. Petalia encouraged Ross to come back to her whenever he needed it, that her door was always open. Dainty believed that this would be beneficial to her beloved, and she made sure that he kept his appointments with Petalia like clockwork. Then a funny thing happened. Word had spread of a group that would listen to the concerns of toxic animals who felt they did not fit in anywhere. Cello and Laddie, along with Dainty and Demuria, had spread the information out to certain individuals who had friends, loved ones, or acquaintances who were dysmorphic about their own toxicity and would never hurt a fly. Before long, a group had started to take shape, with Ross and Petalia at the helm, eventually calling themselves Toxins Anonymous, or Toxanon for short. One of the Never beings that this news was never intended to reach was Arthur Hopper, Cello's kid brother, and his girlfriend Tina Tortoise. Their friend, Charlotte the Chameleon, was a proactive student and volunteer, and they insisted on taking part in making these peers of theirs feel welcome in this group, each knowing a couple of Never beings who fit this criteria themselves. Cello was horrified when she heard about this. It was one thing for Ross to deal with toxic beings' problems, but was afraid for Arthur's own safety. She expressly forbade Arthur from attending the meetings, but Charlotte had a way of getting through to him and Tina. When Laddie lost track of Arthur and the girls one day when the meetings were in session, Cello pleaded with Magnolia to fly her over to the meeting. When she saw from above how naturally Arthur and the girls interacted with these misunderstood Never beings and made them feel welcome, she, pardon the pun, changed her tune. Cello then begged her feathered friend for another further favor, to which Magnolia agreed that she would not say word one to Petalia or Ross or anyone else about her misgivings about this group or her brother being a part of it. Magnolia, being as good as her word, earned a special hug from Cello that day. Not long after Toxanon's formation, Churro had made a surprise announcement to her children that she was expecting a child with Jargon. Not only were the kids shocked, but so was Jargon, who himself was just getting this news for the first time and had immediately fainted. In the 9 months that followed, Jargon was terrified of being a first-time father. Cello and Strat assured him that he had nothing to worry about. He had already reared Arthur from toddlerhood, and he had been around babies before, and that Strat and his Commandant were eager to help in any way. Cello couldn't help but notice a tear coming from Tetrazin's eyes when Strat said this. She pulled her sister V Combine aside and asked her what was really going on. Strat and Tetra tried to have a baby of their own for a long time, but Lord Sylvadarton, Tetra's human uncle, revealed that their reproductive efforts were in vain. As being a Slivskorte pixie and fae, Tetra could not sexually reproduce, and Strat was infertile himself. Cello's heart sank when she heard this. It had finally made sense why she and Laddie couldn't have children either. It was similar to why Celia had that congenital heart defect. It was from them being hybrid Never beings. Churro gave birth to a beautiful 0.9-ounce baby girl, giving her the musical name of Zimriana Timbrella Hopper, a very beautiful name. Because of complications from Zimri's birth, Churro was bedridden for a while and was tended to by Cello and Celia while Strat and Tetra helped Jargon with the newborn. Celia and Cello's daily progress reports of Zimri with Strat and Tetra were better than any of them could have ever hoped, and it was at Cello's suggestion that her big brother and sister V Combine be Zimri's godparents. It was the most natural decision that Churro could ever have made, and with Jargon's blessing as well, Zimri was now her half-brother's goddaughter, as well as his half-cousin via Jargon. The best kind of trifecta. When Celia finally completed her passion project, Petalia's Blue Moon Silk Blankie, Cello and Laddie were elated that Petalia was finally prepared for all those cold nights. The day that was delivered by Laddie, Cello was visited by Princess Bailey Bee of the Neverhive, begging for her help with her little cousin Winona Wasp. Winona was staying in Magnolia's spare treehouse in Lady Sal's underground biodome and was in need of some tender loving care that only Cello herself could provide. Cello happily took on the task, first by playing a soft lullaby to wake up the slumbering sleepyhead gently. The next order of business, after Bailey left, was to prepare a special breakfast for Winona, but finding only birdseed in Magnolia's fridge, Cello shrunk down her size and asked Winona if she'd be willing to help her harvest some cacao beans from the grove in the next sector of the dome, promising the best, most luscious chocolate mousse that she had ever tasted. Winona complied and flew her new friend over to the groves.
Their serene flight did not last long, as the rumbling of rampaging quilled beasts below them screamed in fear of their lives, of Winona of all people. She couldn't feel it at first, but 3 quills had pierced her in her back.
Not gravely. Winona was taken to Lady Galatea so that she could be fixed. Cello, in the meantime, prepared Magnolia's house for Winona's return while preparing the chocolate mousse as she had promised, and made sure that she would feel welcome. The other leg of her mission was to convince Winona when she returned to join Petalia for a session with Toxanon. At the very worst, the group members would collapse from her unfettered cuteness. Her exact words, true story. Later that afternoon, Magnolia swooped down to her guest house and brought Cello and Winona to Petalia's clearing for the Toxanon meeting, and it was Arthur and his 2 friends that sealed the deal by giving Winona her welcome package, as well as a trifecta of hugs that sealed the deal. And that is the story of Cello Discorch prior to the events of Petalia's wish. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, share this video with a friend, and encourage them to do the same. If you've not seen my first 2 NeverDex profile videos, visit the playlist on the left to be on the lookout for more NeverDex videos to come. For further details and art on my other characters, visit my site at jonessisterscomic.home.blog.